Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Belle Shenoy, Editor-in-Chief of MycoAsia Journal of Modern Mycology. I hope you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up. Great. I hope you can see my first slide. Please give me a thumbs up for that too. All right, looks like everything is normal, so I can go ahead with my presentation. Thank you for joining in today, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about traditional knowledge in mycology. It's a very vast subject, but I will be restricting to the how to ascertain the edibility of wild mushrooms. This presentation, follows my offline presentation at Science College, Durg, recently. During the promotion of the event on this talk on MycoAsia WhatsApp groups, there were requests that people would like to listen to this talk. So therefore, I am conducting this webinar. So what is this talk about? First, this talk is about how can traditional knowledge contribute to determining the edibility of wild mushrooms. As I told you, I'm going to limit to the edibility of wild mushrooms and the implications of traditional knowledge into it. Actually, I would be spending most of my time, how can traditional knowledge contribute to the determination of edibility of wild mushrooms. But at the end of during the discussion, we can we can exchange our ideas, what kind of challenges exist in integrating this traditional knowledge with the modern scientific methods. So if you look at the mushroom industry, it's going to be $115.3 billion US dollar big mushroom industry by 2030. At the moment, it is $75 billion billion dollar actually industry. These are the driving factors. What are the driving factors for mushroom industry? First one is vegan population is increasing, so they want protein-rich diet, non-meat option, and as you know, mushrooms are low calorie, high nutrition options, and mushrooms are considered as healthy food option, versatile in the culinary use. Mushrooms are natural medicines; they have lots of medicinal properties. So these are the driving factors which can take the global mushroom industry to $115 billion by 2030. So what is happening in India? Especially in Asia, China is leading. China is leading with the 41,117,000 metric tons of 1,000 metric tons of mushroom production and truffles. Actually, where is India? India is only producing 243,000 metric tons of mushrooms. Basically, China is contributing around 70%, and India's contribution is meager 2%. So, what is happening, or what is not happening, or what is actually the current status of mushroom industry in India? There is apparently there is a lack of large-scale infrastructure and government incentives. There is low awareness and limited research on medical applications of mushrooms. And the last one, most importantly, there is a need for better integration of traditional and modern scientific methods. Compared to China, traditional knowledge remains in India remains mostly within indigenous communities. So therefore, this has had a very limited commercial expansion. So China is doing wonderfully in mushroom production, because the traditional knowledge has been successfully integrated in large-scale commercial production, medicinal applications, and selective breeding. Actually, so there are some basic mycological questions that I would like to ask in this presentation. First one is, how many mushroom species are there in the world? I mean, is there any estimate? There is an estimate that there could be at least 28,000 mushroom species on this earth. And how many of them are taxonomically described? More than 14,000 mushroom species are taxonomically described so far. And important question is, how many mushroom species are edible and how many are poisonous? So this is the core of the presentation. how many mushrooms species are edible, and how do we determine the edibility of mushrooms, actually, especially wild mushrooms. And are there, people keep on asking me, are there modern scientific methods, to differentiate edible species from poisonous species? Let me just highlight this paper by Lee et al. Titled "Reviewing the World's Edible Mushroom Species: A New Evidence-Based Classification System." It is a must. This is a must-read paper for anybody who is interested in mushroom biology. So, in that paper, they describe the history of mushroom consumption. Apparently, mushroom consumption started, around 18,700 years ago in Spain. This is what the record says. Records say. And in China, we have records for mushroom consumption from 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and Egypt 4,600 years. The important question is there, if a mushroom is safe and edible, and people already knew 18,700 years ago, how did the early humans identify mushroom species as edible or not edible or poisonous? Maybe they could have had a trial and error approach. Basically, people started small amounts of mushroom carefully. If they like the aroma, texture, and if there are no bad effects afterwards, then probably people kept on eating it, and had more confidence in such mushrooms or eating such mushrooms. So these are the words of wisdom. The only way to determine the edibility of a mushroom is to eat it. Apparently, there are no standard methods to differentiate edible mushrooms from the wild ones or poisonous ones, especially when we talk about the wild mushrooms. Actually, so status of mushroom cultivation, at the global level, more than 90 mushroom species are cultivated. 630 mushroom species are grown commercially for food and consumed widely. Among the 90 mushroom species cultivated, 60 plus mushroom species are grown for medicinal purposes, such as medicinal purposes, and as a functional food, and for extract used as food additives. So these are some of the popular ones, popular edible mushrooms, popular mushrooms: cremini, morels, shiitake, oyster mushroom, king oyster mushrooms, lion's mane mushrooms, enoki mushrooms, white button mushrooms, portobello mushrooms, porcini mushroom, maitake mushroom, matsutake mushroom, reishi, a giant puffball, Bono shimeji, Jew's ear mushrooms, and chanterelle mushrooms. So let me go back to the study of Lee et al. Basically, they looked into the literature of around 2,700 mushroom species from the world, from many countries. They probably 90 countries, and they looked into the records, and they grouped mushroom species as E1, E2, E3, and P. So E1 refers to these are edible; they're confirmed to be edible. Basically, there is a clear evidence that a species has been consumed without adverse or harmful effects, and these mushrooms are safe and suitable to it. And there are second category of mushrooms, E2. These are edible, but and their edibility confirmed, but with condition. Basically, this means that there is a clear evidence that a species has been consumed after it has been cooked or prepared in such a way as to make it safe or suitable to eat. So it includes species that may result in allergic or adverse reactions when consumed with alcohol, or for example. So third category is edible but unconfirmed. So there is evidence. There is an evidence for safe consumption. The evidence for safe consumption is uncertain or incomplete. In case of E3, edible, unconfirmed. And last one is poisonous. There are enough evidence to tell that these mushrooms cause adverse and harmful reactions when consumed. So basically, this is what Lee et al. Did. So for even if under even they recognized 2006 mushroom species. Under E2 category, they identified 183. Basically, we can say in the world we have, I mean, we have confirmed information for edibility of around 2,180 or 80 plus mushroom species. So for rest of them, we are not certain. So how about the edibility of remaining, for example, 12,000 mushroom species we have taxonomically described? How do we ascertain their edibility? So here comes the role of traditional knowledge. So the elite all states that the traditional knowledge of rural and indigenous communities remains a historically significant source of knowledge on edibility and white mushroom. So that's about the work of Lee et al. Let me give some information about how these foragers identify edible wild mushroom. These mushroom foragers are not experts, not necessarily modern taxonomies of mushrooms actually. In this study titled Mycological Rationality, Heuristics, Perception and Decision Making in Mushroom Foraging. So this talks about how do Finnish foragers identify edible wild mushrooms. So they did a survey, and as per the survey, who or where did you learn the forage from? Most of them learned the foraging from parents, and some of them from grandparents and other relatives, from books, from internet, from courts and other sources actually. And why do people Finnish foragers do the foraging? Most of them do it for the food, some do it for fun and hobby, some do for research and science, some people do it for relaxing, some other people do it for nature experience, some do it for exercise, and some do it for social activities. So these are the motivations to get into mushroom foraging in Finnish community. So the survey suggested that 77% foragers report that they often use rules of thumb when foraging. What is meant by rules of thumb? I'm going to explain that actually. So basically, this is heuristics. So there are three types of heuristics in Finnish foragers. First one is risk avoidance. So foragers prioritize avoiding poisonous mushroom over identifying. So better to be safe than sorry. That is the one of the rule actually, rule of thumb actually. First, better to avoid poisonous than consume incorrectly identified mushroom species. Second one is recognition-based heuristics, fast identification. They would use more instead of using multiple characters, they would use a single character to make a judgment. For example, it could be wrong also, but white mushrooms are edible. More colorful mushrooms could be, not so safe. So these are the kind of decisions they made. So this kind of decision based on one character or single cue, they require prior experience and prior experience in that particular area. So as you know, traditional knowledge is quite kind of restricted in geographical sense. So the third one is search heuristics. So the experienced foragers develop environment awareness. So somebody who has spent 30-40 years foraging in an area, they would know where to get what kind of mushrooms, where to get edible ones, where to go, where to avoid, what to avoid actually. So that is called search heuristics, finding mushroom patches based on the experiences, prior experience and environmental awareness. This is about the Finnish foragers. Let me give one example from Indian. Let me give an Indian example. This is from Karun and Dr. Sridhar. They did a study and they published in a journal called Data in Brief. The title of the paper is Edible Wild Mushrooms of the Western Ghats, Data on Ethnic Knowledge. So basically this research was conducted in Kodagu district of Karnataka state. I think here is Mangalore, somewhere here. You can find probably Kodagu somewhere here, bordering Kerala. So they they studied different types of habitats. They included forest and sacred groves. They included shola forest and lateritic scrub jungles. They included coffee plantation or orchards. They included bamboo thickets and grasslands. They included paddy fields, cattle sheds, and home gardens. So they studied all these locations, and they conducted this study between 2012 and 2016. They focused on indigenous, tribal, and ethnic communities, including these are the names of the communities from Cook region: Amma Kodava, Aregauda, Billava, Jamma, Mapale, Kudia, Kuruba Medas, Okkaliga Gauda, Yaravas. So these are the communities who were included in the surveys and the study. So the research Dr. Karun and Professor Sridhar conducted ethnomycological surveys. So they conducted semi-structured interviews with the local foragers. They did the direct field observation of mushrooms collection and habitat selection. They did the photographic documentation of mushrooms. They did the scientific identification of specimens using macro and micromorphological analysis. So for each mushroom species, they gave they gave a scientific name and also vernacular names in local dialects, Kodava, Tulu, and Kannada. So the researchers identified 51 wild mushroom species, and they classified these wild edible mushroom species into 23 genera. So these are the photographs from their papers, actually. So they classified mushrooms grown on wood or monocot shrubs, stub, actually. These are the ones. And these mushrooms grown on soil. All right. So these are the main highlights. Ethnic communities identify mushrooms based on substrate specificity. For example, tree species, termite mounds, or soil type. Ethnic communities identify the mushrooms based on morphological features such as shape, size, colors, spore print, and aroma. And they also identify they also recognize the ecological associations like mutualistic fungi versus saprophytic fungi. So they also considered seasonality, post of monsoon-dependent fruiting patterns, and each mushroom has a vernacular name. For example, if mushroom grows on Karimara, like Fistulina hepatica. So this is the scientific name of the tree, and common name is in Kannada is Karimara. So they would call the mushroom as Karimara kum. Kum means mushroom in that particular language. So and some of them identified based on the appearance and texture. So for example, Astrius hygrometricus. Kallu alambu. Kallu means stone-like mushroom, actually. So they also considered mutualistic association, for example, Termitomyces species growing on termite mounds. So ethnic groups, they employ various preparation techniques. I mean, after collecting it for the eating, they use different methods they used various preparation techniques. For example, direct cooking, boiling, frying, and roasting, sun drying for preservation, pickling and salting for long-term storage, partial burning in case of Scleroderma citrinum and Astrius hygrometricus, and fermentation, especially fermentation of certain pleurotus species. This is an Indian example. There are many more studies from India and the world. Let me just go through this list. The first one is by Sachan et al., the title of the paper is Indigenous Knowledge of Ethnic Tribes for Utilization of Wild Mushrooms as Food and Medicinal in Similipal Biosphere Reserve, Odisha, India. Second one is Traditional Knowledge of Wild Edible Mushrooms of Himachal Pradesh. Third one is Conspectus of Traditional Ethnomycological Insights pertaining to wild mushrooms of South Kashmir, India. And traditional knowledge and use of wild mushroom in Simbandan, particular district of central Nepal. And this particular I think King Yuan mushroom culture system as agriculture. I was talking about China, how China has utilized traditional knowledge. So this is a must. This paper is a must if somebody is interested in understanding how why Chinese are so successful in mushroom production. There are a couple of papers from Mexico, traditional knowledge and use of wild mushrooms with the bicultural importance in Mazatec culture of Oaxaca, Mexico, cradle of ethnomycology. Then there is another paper, traditional knowledge, uses, perceptions of mushrooms among the particular communities of this in Mexico. Then there is an interesting paper titled Global Perspectives on Ecological, Cultural, and Socio-Economic Relevance of wild edible fungi. There is a paper from Korea, traditional knowledge on wild mushrooms in the surrounding villages of some national park. Then there is an interesting paper suggested by one of the MycoAsians, a current checklist of local names and utilization information of Indonesian wild mushrooms. Then there is a beautiful paper from Brazil, over 400 food resources from Brazil, evidence-based records of wild edible mushrooms. There is a paper from traditional uses of wild edible mushrooms among the local communities of Swat, Pakistan. There is a paper titled Understanding Cultural Significance, the Edible Mushroom Case. Probably Professor Sridhar shared this paper, Soma, an enigmatic, mysterious plant of the Vedic Aryas, an appraisal. There is a theory that there is a mushroom behind Soma, actually. So you could read that. And if somebody is interested to more about mushroom cultivation, edibility is a beautiful book, 2004 book, Mushrooms, Cultivation, Nutritional Value, Medicinal Effect, and Environmental Impact. There is a beautiful paper on wood ear fungi, ethno-mycological perception towards wood ear fungi in and around Indian subcontinent. And recently, MycoAsia published a beautiful paper titled A Review of Wild Edible Medicinal Mushrooms in Sri Lanka. And for anybody who is interested in Indian mushrooms, this book is must, actually. Mushroom Wealth of India by R.C. Upadhyay and co-authors. So these are some of the other studies one could actually look into. So what is the way forward, actually? Of course, there have been many reports of use of ethnic knowledge, tribal knowledge, for ascertaining the edibility of wild mushrooms. But we need to conduct systematic documentation of traditional knowledge from indigenous and rural. There has to be a national level program. If not national level programs, state level programs. For example, in Karnataka, researchers can have a state level documentation, systematic documentation of traditional knowledge from indigenous and rural communities. For example, people from Udupi area, they could actually talk to, could be in a tribal community. So how do they have traditional knowledge about medicinal edible wild mushrooms, actually? Similarly, many other tribes are there in Karnataka. One could have a state level systematic documentation of traditional knowledge from indigenous and rural communities. We could do it for Chhattisgarh. Probably Himachal Pradesh is already doing good. Uttarakhand is already doing good. So, but that it would be nice if we could have national level or at least the state level, programs. We need to digitize oral histories before people disappear, and we need to digitize local classification systems for edible and toxic mushrooms. So there is a need to integrate traditional knowledge with the modern fungal taxonomy. We can use biochemical and molecular techniques to analyze mushrooms identified as edible in traditional knowledge. We can compare traditional classification with modern taxonomic and toxicity studies. Especially, there is a great scope for toxicity studies. We can encourage participatory research where traditional foragers collaborate with scientists. I see some of our MycoAsians are doing it in Kerala, and some are doing in Goa. So we can establish databases if there are not many databases linking traditional and scientific knowledge on mushrooms. We could, you know, um, and we can use this book. Each page of the book has information about traditional knowledge of particular species. This wealth, mushroom wealth of India. Uh, there is a need for organizing workshops. I mean, more number of workshops, field studies, and interactive learning sessions between traditional foragers and researchers. I think with this, I conclude my presentation. I want to give more time for the discussion because here are the real experts in the audience who could share their opinions, their experience and insights on this. I would like to acknowledge the support of my organization, CSR NIO. I would like to thank Professor Sridhar, Professor Samantha Karunaratna, Dr. Vishwajanani Settigeri from TKD of CSR headquarters, Dr. Rohit Sharma for helping me with many resources and suggestions, and MycoIndia, MycoAsia, Association of Fungal Biologists for your great support, and ladies and gentlemen in the audience for your kind presence today and making the event quite interesting with the people, 66 people in the audience. Now we can open